You know, nowadays, modern day cars are made of very thin, high strength, high carbon steels. They're a lot different than what we had years ago. The metal we had years ago you could really do something with. You can't do that with these modern day cars. You know, when a sheet of steel comes out of the rolling mill, it lays flat, right down on the concrete here. It lays flat in a complete relaxed condition because it was made flat. But when the manufacturer takes it and stamps it into one of these curvy panels, he causes it to have stress, and in some cases, severe stress. Like a '59 Pontiac that we restored years ago, we found that the quarter panel was under severe stress, and this is where you can get into a problem when you're trying to do lead work. We're going to demonstrate here what heat does to sheet metal. As you can see, this door has curves in it and these speed lines. The manufacturer does this for a couple of purposes. Obviously, they do it for the styling of the automobile, but secondly, it's done to give the sheet metal strength so that the thing doesn't oil can. If this was a flat panel, it would oil can. What we're going to do is we're going to put some heat on this panel, and we're going to show you what happens to it when you heat the panel. Before we do that, let's show you what kind of a situation we have right now. You can see this piece of wood here. It'll lay flat on the door. We can't push down either side. There is no belly to this door. It is a perfectly flat piece through here. It gets its strength this way. Now when we put heat on it, that's going to change. Now, the reason we're doing this is because before you lead, you want to make sure that you test the metal to make sure that it's going to behave. You want to make sure that it's going to do what you want it to do. In the case of the Pontiac, when we put heat to the quarter panel on that Pontiac, the heat actually made the door push away. And if I see this panel pushing away from the heat, I'm going to get off of it real quick, because otherwise I can permanently buckle the door. Now we're going to warm this up real good, and I can see that this door is going to be all right, even though there's some stress built into it, because it hasn't pushed away from the heat. It's actually coming towards the heat. And we would do this before we do any lead job, because if you don't, you can cause a permanent buckle into a panel. Now you can do this. You can heat this door up and let it cool 100 times with this torch, and you would never have any problem with it. Just as long as you don't get the door red or blue hot. I think maybe we got enough heat. Let's see what we got. Now, as you can see, the door has bellied out. The heat has brought the door out towards the heat has brought the panel out towards the heat. If this would have sunk in or looked like it was going to sink in, you'd better pull the torch off and plan on doing this repair with the body fillers, the plastic fillers. And this is why we had to tell our customers in cases where they didn't want anything but lead used on their automobile, we had to warn them that sometimes we had to use body fillers. You know, body plastic's got a bad name. They got a bum rap, and we're going to explain that a little later on in our plastic section. But you can see here that by putting the heat on this door, it has actually changed the shape of the door. Don't worry about that as long as it comes towards the heat. Before you can do lead work, here are some of the tools and equipment you're going to need to do the job. We have a little torch tip here. You slip this torch tip right on the end of the torch, and what it does is gives you a soft blue flame. Air enters in the side here, and it just softens the flame. It's really necessary for lead work. Here's an acid brush, and what we do, we use this to apply this tinning butter to the fender that we're going to lead. Here's another torch. This is a propane torch, of course, and we're going to show you how you can use this a little later in the film. Here are a couple of lead bars. We have a couple of lead paddles. These are different shapes. This one's rounded, this one's flat. In some cases, people would cut the edges to a point, anything to make the application. We have a tub of tallow here, and this tallow is used to keep your paddle nice and slick as you're wiping lead. If you don't put something on the paddle, the heat will burn and you'll have wood chips right into the lead. We have a couple of Vixen file blades. One's flat and the other one is half round. And we have a couple of handles that these Vixen file blades go on. This one right here is sort of curved. It takes the round blade, like so. You're going to need some sort of a steel wool or a product to wipe the tinning compound around on the fender. These are recommended because they are a bronze material. They don't rust, so you're not wiping rust into the place that you're tinning. This is the first time we've shown you one of these. This is a paint mask. It has carbon filters in it. Whenever you're doing any lead work, or paint work for that matter, but when you're doing lead work, all these products have acids in them. You have to use a mask. If you don't, you're going to breathe in these acids and you're really going to hurt yourself. The reason we keep this mask in this container here, this pouch, is it makes the mask last longer. These are carbon filters, and if you hang this out on a bench or out in the open air, these will deteriorate in a lot bigger hurry than they would if you keep them in this bag. Now, where would you use lead? Well, you'd use lead around places of stress, around the door hinges and deck lid openings, anywhere where you're going to have stress of the metal, slamming a door, underneath the handles. That's where you would use lead. If you'd use plastic underneath these door handles, you're liable to find that as soon as you grab the handle a few times, the plastic is chipping out. That's why lead is important in a restoration job. Now what we're going to do is show you a little tinning, and we're going to do it with this fender right here. The reason you have to tin this fender, if you don't tin this metal, lead will not stick to it. You could stick lead all over this fender, and if it isn't tinted, it just won't stick. It'll just fall off. So that's the importance of the tin. Now, we have our torch, and we put our torch tip on. Before we light this up, what we're going to do here after I put my mask on is I'm going to warm this metal up. I'm going to apply the tinning butter with a brush, and then I'm going to push it around and move it around with this bronze wool until I have it tinted completely around. Another thing you want to do when you tin is if you have a little dent here that you're going to lead, you want to tin out further, a couple of inches further than what you're actually going to put lead on, just so that when you do put lead out, it sticks. If you don't, it'll be rolling up on you. So I'm going to put my mask on, and we'll apply some heat, and we'll show you how this tin butter works. Okay, with this area tinted, we can now apply some lead. But before we apply lead, we want to let this cool real good. We want to wipe it down with some lacquer thinner. And then we want to come back with a solution of baking soda and water. What that does is kill the acid. There is acid in these materials, and you don't want to put that acid underneath the lead. You want to wash this clean, but you let it cool real good. Then you can get your thinner and wipe it off. The thinner takes off oils and other contaminants, and then your solution of water and baking soda will remove any acids that you have here. Now, we're going to do some lead work on a 1939 Ford fender that we customized for a friend of ours. We tinted this fender ahead of time to save time, but we're going to show you how you can do lead work on this fender. We have a very blunt end right here. We can't leave that. We want to shape that, make that nice and pointy so that our taillight lens fits real nice to it. We want to bring some metal or some lead out to it. The way we're going to do that is with this piece of tailpipe. We got an old piece of tailpipe. We welded a couple of brackets on it, and as you notice, we haven't had it in here, so we haven't tinted it. That means that the lead isn't going to stick to it. What we're going to do is put this in the back side and put a couple of screws in it, lock it in place, and then we're going to lead around it, and we're going to lead right up against this piece of pipe. When we're finished, we'll be able to push the pipe out, and we'll have our taillight ring or door, whatever you want to call it, right there on the lead. And that's why we're going to use the 30% lead, because this is where the material is going to be hanging out into the open. We have our pipe in. We're ready to do some leading. Get a mask back on. And light up. See if we can't get some lead work done. We're going to use our round paddle for this because we're working in an area that has got a lot of curves to it. And now, since this is cool, we have to heat the entire area again. You just can't go in and shock it trying to get some heat to the place where you want to start. Make sure we got our 30% bar. The lead is going to not stick to this piece right here because we haven't tinted it. We'll always work from left to right because I'm right-handed. I'm going to heat the bar as I keep the metal hot. And we'll only heat just about a half inch of this bar. Just sort of see how it's heating. Got a little bit too warm, but you make sure that you don't get it too hot so it falls off. And you only heat just a half inch or so. That way, you won't have it falling on the floor. And you got to keep the metal warm as you go. You got a place there where it's a little bit cool. And when you paddle this, you have to press it in. We're going to change paddles here for a few minutes so we can press this up. And get the lead moved up a little bit closer to the back of the panel here. We got to bring it up over the top because we don't want to leave that steel ridge right there. And with lead, it's a molten material. You got to keep it. You got to keep paddling on it, or else you'll have a chance of some bubbles. Okay, let's use a propane torch on this for a while. Fred, you want to pull that table out of the way? That's far enough. Propane is a little difficult to work with because you can see that if you turn a propane tank over on its nose, the flame goes out. But you can do it. Sort of have to work on an upright position like this. And it'll do a good job. Just a little harder to work with and it'll be a little bit heavier on your hands. Works pretty nice though. Actually, it's a little bit more flame than you need, but it works pretty good. Remember, always to tint back far enough. There's a few places here where I haven't tinted because we're going to continue on, and I wanted to move along with the lead work here. So we're going to tint more as we go along. Now you always want to paddle this lead as much as you can. Paddle over it so that you keep the bubbles from coming to the top. We're going to explain that in just a few minutes. This is molten metal, and it'll have bubbles in it just like water. And those bubbles will get you in trouble later on in your paint job, so you want to paddle it in nice. That's all right. Now you have to give this a chance to cool before you start filing on it. So while it's cooling, we're going to give you some tips on the leading process. Here's some tips about lead work. We want to talk about undercutting and about the pits that you can get in lead. If this, for instance, is your dent, when you lead this, you put a little bit more lead on to fill it than you would normally use because you're going to cut it off with a file blade. In the process of paddling lead, you can cause little air bubbles throughout the lead. If you don't paddle it correctly, follow our instructions, you'll have these air bubbles. Some of these air bubbles may be close to the surface, and when you file the lead off, you leave some of these little bubbles open to the surface. It's very important that you use a grease and wax remover or a thinner to go down and wash the tallow out of these little pits. If you don't, you're going to close those in with your primer and your paint, and later on you're going to have a festering spot, a place that's going to raise on you. You have to clean these little bubbles, these little air bubbles, real good with a degreaser before you put any primer on it. Now here's another thing about lead work is, like I said, when you put lead in this hole or this area, you'll wind up with a little bit more lead, and after you file it, even though you have a stiff metal blade, it sort of looks like this. You have undercut that lead. You can't get away from that because here you have a hard surface, here you have a hard surface, and here you have a soft surface of lead. You can't hardly get away from the undercutting situation. So when we get into our plastic tape, we're going to show you the material that you use as it's called polyester putty. You'll use that to take care of this undercutting It is designed to take care of like 1/8-inch deep areas, and you just put that over top of this, and it will take care of all the undercutting. Lead feels like it's cool enough. Let's see if we can get this tube out of here first. It's a real snug fit because we got the lead popped right up close to it. Okay, boy, we got a good snug fit. Got a good pack of lead on the inside there. Now we're going to do some filing. This is a Vixen file blade, and we don't have a handle on it. It's kind of neat to work without a handle sometime when you're working with these. I'm pulling this handle towards me, pulling the file towards me, and this is a half round file, and that's what I need to do this in here. It cuts down just like butter. It really makes a nice job. Now you see we've tinted up way past where we put the lead. That's a good idea, because if you tint too shallow, then you're putting lead or trying to put lead over an area that you're not tinted, and that won't hold. So this way we got a good bond with the lead and the metal right here where the two meet. It won't roll off on us, especially when we try to file. That is really looking nice. Now, the nice thing about lead, it's not only strong, but it's soft. If you have a low place somewhere, you can take a hammer and you can bring it up and then take your file and just simply cut it off. If you have trouble hitting the right spot because you're not so good with a hammer, this is a bullseye. This point here comes right up through this sight, so it really gives you a non-fail situation. You can go in there and you can hit the right spot and come back and shave it nice and smooth. Now we're going to design a little on the front here. You know, this is custom work, and you're the one that has to design it to suit yourself. Our custom taillight job came out real good. Lead work looks good. We've got it sculptured in just the way we wanted it. I think it really came out nice. There's one thing I have to tell you about this. You're going to have a few places where you're going to have some imperfections, a little pit, or maybe a place where there's a little wave, and you can't be expected to work all of that out. So we're going to show you a product when we get into our plastic section that'll talk about this. It's called polyester putty, and what you do is you just apply it and you'll sand it, and this will take out all the imperfections. Now we have another product that we want to talk about. It's called metal prep. When you lead, the acid fumes will cover this surrounding metal and cause a rust. Even if you were to walk away from this overnight and come back the next day to do more lead work, you're going to have rust on the metal, not on the lead, of course. So the thing to do is to wipe it off with this metal prep. Now this comes in quarts or gallons, and it's diluted 50-50 with water. And it's very, very hard on your hands, so make sure that you use some kind of rubber glove when you use it. You simply wipe it on and you dry it off, and you come back the next day, you'll be ready to go and do it again. And that's all there is to it, and now we're ready to go into our next project.